A hidden facility built in the service of an evil regime.
No matter how healthy you were when you went into those tunnels, after only a few weeks, your body is starting to fall apart.
A ghostly town which is home to hidden treasure.
People have to be pretty desperate to come out here, or there must be something that makes it worth all that trouble and danger.
A peaceful village that was shattered by the terrors of war.
The level of destruction here is on such a scale that some major event has happened.
And a mysterious facility with a toxic past.
So these have been fenced off because of concerns about contamination and public access. But you can see the multi-walled nature of the labyrinth here.
Some are engineering marvels now abandoned. Others are ruins shrouded in mystery. But within each of these crumbling structures are the echoes of history. While some are associated with dark times, they are all reminders of human ingenuity and endeavor. Each haunted shell is now ready to be unmasked to tell its own powerful story. In the remote wilderness of southern Montana, in the USA, there's a deserted valley which is haunted by a dark past.
This is a hard land to live in. There's not a lot of water. It gets incredibly cold in the winter. This is one of the most sparsely populated regions in the whole country.
At first glance, the landscape appears stark and desolate. But there is eerie evidence of life here in the shape of a derelict town.
Coming over the hill and seeing this town, you'd think there were people still living in it. The outside, the inside, it's like time was frozen there. And the people were just vanished away somehow.
This was a well-established and large town that had the infrastructure to cater to a large population that had a reason to be there.
But just why they were there is not abundantly clear from the sort of ghost town that's there now.
The first clue to the settlement's history lies in its location.
All of the buildings follows very closely the route of the river. Makes you wonder whether there was something more than just the supply of water that was valuable about this river.
Something has drawn people there for hundreds of years. There's value in the ground and in the rivers. There's something there that's worth killing for. You wouldn't know it to look at it now, but this was once one of the most violent places in America. Killings, robberies, shootouts, hangings. What could have caused all this violence?
But the valley is haunted by a rumor that just won't go away.
In the surrounding area, somewhere nearby, buried is a great, great treasure.
The story surrounding those hidden riches is just one of the mysteries that still torment this town. The graphic tales of robberies, murders, and betrayals that swirl around this place come from a time when it was one of the last frontiers of the Wild West. The story begins in the 1860s, as Park Ranger John Phillips explains.
In July 1862, John White and a party of men were on their way to the Salmon River to the community of Florence, and en route they came upon this stream.
Like thousands of others in the middle of the 19th century, these pioneers were traveling across America in search of a new life and hoping to make their fortunes.
They were going to put their pans down into this stream, go through these gravels looking for black sands, And lo and behold, after a little test, they found out that they had found what they were looking for, gold.
John White and his fellow travelers had hit the jackpot. And this wasn't just ordinary gold. It was 99% pure.
That find started the gold rush to what we now call Montana. Within weeks, there were hundreds. Within months, there were thousands of people in this community, all trying to get rich by out there panning for gold in this little stream.
The gold mining town of Bannack was born, and it was soon booming.
You would have seen houses and tents and wagons as far as the eye could see. There were people, there were saloons, there were brothels, there was everything. This was a very active and wild place.
But inevitably, the new wealth also attracted criminals.
Once people realize there's gold in the river, greed overruns everything else. The idea that you need law and order, well, that's a secondary consideration.
Morals, they were out the window. Outlaws, they came like a magnet, and that created nothing but trouble. The hills around town were practically filled with bandits and outlaws, and guess what? That led to murder.
Even in a town as wild as Bannack, the crime wave needed to be brought under control. The lack of law enforcement couldn't last forever.
A sheriff finally arrives with a couple of deputies. He's here to promote law and order. But is that all he's here to do?
The sheriff's name was Henry Plummer. Plummer was a man with a colorful, some might say, checkered past. He had been a successful prospector who became quite rich early in life. But he was known to have killed several men, although he had somehow managed to avoid jail or the gallows. In 1863, he managed to get himself elected sheriff of Bannack, pledging, perhaps improbably, to establish law and order there. At first, he seemed to be living up to the promise. Troublemakers were identified, rounded up, and put inside the newly built jailhouse.
The first jail in Montana, could have just imagined what it would have been like here in the wintertime. Henry Plummer was a man that had multiple sides. He put on this great front and he showed, by building the jail and thing, that he was an honest, hardworking law enforcement official. But on the other side, nothing is ever as crystal clear as that we like to believe it is.
And of course, Plummer wasn't all that he seemed. And despite the apparent efforts of the new sheriff, Bannack soon became more violent, not less. So what happened to Henry Plummer? And what does he have to do with the stories of buried treasure that still haunt these streets? With crime getting worse, before long, some townsfolk decided to take matters into their own hands.
So a sheriff and his deputies are just not enough to bring law and order to this place. So a new group sets itself up, the Montana Vigilantes. The locals band together to do something about all the crime.
The masked men of the Montana Vigilantes began hunting down suspected criminals and simply executing those who they deemed guilty.
The entire town was riddled with corruption. But what's really interesting is that it comes to our attention that the center of that corruption was the sheriff himself.
A rumor spread that Plummer was actually the secret head of a terrifying gang of bandits known as the Innocents. So, at the beginning of 1864, the Montana Vigilantes decided to take action.
On a freezing cold night, Henry Plummer and his men, taken from their homes and from the saloons, are captured by vigilantes and brought into this area out here where they would meet their final demise. All three men were hanged on the gallows.
So was that rumor about Henry Plummer true? There's a tale about his final moments that has some convinced.
One legend has it that on his way to the gallows, Sheriff Plummer pleaded for his life. And in exchange for his life, he offered the location where a secret stash of gold worth $100,000 back then was buried.
But despite the sheriff's death, the violence continued, making many think it was the Montana vigilantes themselves who had been behind the crimes all along. Whatever the truth, Bannack remained as lawless as ever until 1870, when the gold began to run out.
With towns like these out in the wild, when the incentive for people to stay is gone, people just left. Only a few stayed.
But there was the little matter of the sheriff's hidden treasure.
What about this buried gold that Plummer had tried to buy his way out of death with? Did it really exist? It was never found.
A small number of hardy people continued to eke out a living in Bannack. But by the 1950s, they'd all but gone, and what remained of the infamous mining town became a state park. But the mystery at the heart of its wild, lawless past still endures. Was Sheriff Plummer Bannack's real criminal mastermind? And will they ever find his missing treasure?
Did they get rid of him because he was bad? Or did they get rid of him because he was good? No one knows for certain.
Deep in the woods of the Owl Mountains in southwest Poland lies a secret entrance into a dark underworld.
From the outside, it doesn't really look like much at all, but when you get underground, it's vast. And it's all in solid rock.
Inside, murky tunnels lead to eerie halls and flooded caves. Is this perhaps a natural phenomenon, or is it proof of something more sinister?
It's in rock that wouldn't normally form caverns like this. There's something that's been built here to create those hollows.
Somebody has gone to great lengths to build this secret underground facility.
The only reason you carve your way into rock is either to get something valuable out of it or put something valuable into it.
Above ground, the puzzle continues. What are these strange concrete structures? And who built this vast complex?
To make those holes in that rock, anyone working on that is going to be horrendous conditions.
This is a creation born of terrible suffering, in the name of an evil and ruthless regime.
It's a place that demonstrates the willingness of people to do the most difficult things, to carve their way into mountains in order to keep the machinery of death operating.
Polish author Igor Witkowski knows these underground tunnels and their secrets better than anyone.
The largest halls existing are about 100 meters long, 12 meters high, and around 10 meters wide. That gives some idea as to the scale of the project.
These enormous halls were about the length of a football pitch. So, what was the dark purpose behind this vast complex? How did it come to be built? And why is it situated in such a remote location?
Here is a place that is isolated from other population centers. It's hard to get to.
Hidden by forest, the building is almost invisible from the air. Its construction was deemed high priority when building began at the height of the Second World War. The Nazis and the Axis powers had dominated Europe, including this part of present-day Poland. But by 1943, their empire of evil elsewhere was beginning to crumble. In North Africa, the German army had finally been defeated. The Allies had invaded Sicily, and Italy and Mussolini's government, once a staunch ally of Hitler, had fallen. At the beginning of 1943, the Germans suffered a heavy defeat on the Eastern Front, when the last of its soldiers surrendered at Stalingrad after one of the most brutal and bloody battles of the entire war. Germany was losing the war on the seas and in the air. The Allies were stepping up their attacks and were now raining down bombs on cities across German territory.
It's a shock to the Germans. All of a sudden, the reality of the Allied bombing campaign becomes very, very real.
As Germany loses control of the skies over the Third Reich, Germany has got to harden the protection of its industry.
And they start a program to put as many things as possible deep underground for fear of the Allied bombers.
In a desperate attempt to turn the tide of the war, the Germans invested in this colossal piece of engineering. It was part of a top-secret Nazi project codenamed Riese, the Giant.
If we were building a tunnel complex like this in peacetime, tunneling through hard rock, we'd use machinery, we would use fuel. But of course, the Nazis were fighting the Second World War. They couldn't spare resources.
This lack of machinery may appear to explain why the tunnels had to be abandoned before they were finished. But in fact, the Nazis had found another way to get them built.
We're looking at a facility that is being built with thousands of slave laborers. And by 1943-44, the German war economy is operating under a massive slave labor system.
Riese was situated near to several of the most sickening apparatus in the Third Reich, the concentration camps. Now the Nazis had found a new, twisted use for the men and women they had forced into them.
This is like a concentration camp that has been deployed into a mountain. Everyone there is being worked to death.
The fact that there's this almost inexhaustible supply of slave labor makes it even more eerie when you look at how much of a hollows and how much of a network was built by the blood, sweat and tears of slave laborers.
It was a horrendous work. I would say that it was the closest analogy to Dante's Inferno. There were 3, maybe more, thousands of prisoners killed in the process.
The Germans were desperate to complete this secret construction at any cost. But why? Even after the war, its true purpose was never clear. Some Nazi leaders claimed it was intended to be a secret headquarters for Hitler. The theories still swirl around these tunnels and caverns. Igor has his own chilling ideas.
The Riese was part of a larger undertaking of the SS, which purpose was research and manufacture weapons of mass destruction. Large halls of this kind might have been used, and usually were used, for assembly of large weapons, such as aircraft, missiles, and so on.
With the Allies advancing into German territory, the Nazis were searching for a miracle weapon with which to hit back. Was this where they planned to produce it?
These tunnels are intended to be the place where German know-how, German racial superiority is going to create the wonder weapons, the Wunderwaffen, that will enable Germany to win the war.
It may have been that an experimental superweapon was being developed here, but the mystery only deepens when you explore further.
Just vast in itself, but actually there's another 5 underground constructions along this particular mountain range.
In fact, the whole region is littered with facilities like this, which were all heavily armed and hidden from view. They were abandoned at various stages of completion, and it's believed that the intention was for them all to eventually link up, thus forming a vast underground city that would help win the war for Germany.
The Germans hope to build probably the largest underground facility in the entire Third Reich. But at least the Riese itself has never been finished.
The Red Army, the Soviet Army, is relentlessly invading westward, taking back big chunks of Europe from the Nazis. As the Red Army comes closer, like the rest of the SS's concentration camp system, everything is death marched back into Germany in order to ensure that there will be no evidence left for the War Crimes Tribunal.
By the end of 1944, the Soviets had reached the Polish capital, Warsaw. Early the following year, the Nazis fled Riese, abandoning for good their mysterious underground project. Today, questions are still asked about Riese's true role in the Nazi war machine. But what's certain is the terrible price paid by those who were forced to build it.
This is an underground concentration camp where thousands and thousands of people were forced to breathe their last in the service of an evil regime. This is a monument to the deaths of millions.
At the southwestern tip of England, in the tranquil Cornish countryside, is a valley scattered with overgrown remains.
There's all sorts of curious things going on here. There's the chimney, there's obviously foundations from different buildings.
It's a confused site with a variety of abandoned buildings, some partly buried masonry, some collapsed structures.
From beneath the grass, bizarre circular mounds appear alongside the ruins.
Looking deeper here, there's clearly been a lot of activity over a considerable period of time.
It's got the makings of some big buildings, but in part it looks like they've been pulled down or they've fallen down or something's even broken them.
Almost nothing remains of the many structures that once stood here.
Clearly nature has taken its toll on the landscape here, but there's also, could there have been something more explosive in the past? What has destroyed this environment?
But look closely, and you can begin to uncover the landscape's deadly history.
In this particular part of Cornwall, it's not what's above the surface that's the clue, it's what's below. Beneath nature is a toxic past.
So how was this place contaminated and poisoned? And does that explain why it's now abandoned?
When I first came to this landscape about 30 years ago, I felt a real sense of mystery and definitely an urge to explore.
Ainsley Cox, Research and Information Officer at Cornwall Council, has made extensive studies of the site.
Here at the head of the Poldice Valley in Midwest Cornwall, we're in very much a rural setting, but you'll see around me crumbling walls, crumbling features, which allude to an industrial past.
This valley was once home to the region's biggest business, mining.
Cornwall is famed for its tin mines. This is where it started, and the expertise that people built up here, they exported around the world. Cornish tin drove the Industrial Revolution.
Cornwall has been described as being, in the mid-19th century, as probably the most important mining district in the world. And the production of copper and tin specifically was the principal reason for that.
But these aren't just the remains of a tin or copper mine. There's evidence of something more lethal. What was produced here had the capacity to kill millions.
This site was at the heart of an international trade in top-grade poison that spread around the world.
So, what deadly chemical was produced here? And for what evil purpose was it used?
Originally in Cornwall, tin was the goal. That's the product that had the market and commanded the profit. And anything that got in the way of that profit was a nuisance. One of the biggest ones was arsenic, a completely poisonous, toxic nuisance.
Odorless and tasteless, but highly toxic, arsenic was known as the perfect poison. But in these mines, it was impossible to escape it.
What's interesting with tin mining is that the very nature of those types of tin-rich veins is they often contain quite high concentrations of arsenic and sulfur as well. And for the most part, early on, you'd try and discard these, particularly things like arsenic, which are highly poisonous.
This is Poldice Valley, where arsenic was produced for more than 100 years. In the 19th century, the mine here stopped making copper and tin and turned out poison. But why would anyone need industrial amounts of arsenic?
These have been fenced off because of concerns about contamination and public access. But you can see the multi-walled nature of the arsenic labyrinth here.
The labyrinths were where the purified arsenic was collected. First, the metal ore extracted by the miners was heated to a fiery 540 degrees Celsius. During this process, the arsenic separated from the metal and turned into gas. That gas was fed through flues that led to labyrinth chambers, where it cooled down and solidified as crystals.
The doorways would have been unplugged, opened up, and then workers would go in with shovels and brooms and basically remove all of the arsenic soot, as it was called, from the interior of the labyrinth.
In the 19th century, the arsenic industry was booming, and mines producing it opened throughout this valley.
By the 1870s, a handful of facilities in Cornwall were providing over half of the world's arsenic.
This lethal commodity was in demand for a variety of reasons.
By about 1800, the world is starting to demand a wider range of raw materials. One of those was arsenic. A toxic poison. It's hard to think of a use for it, isn't it? But people needed it for all sorts of different reasons all around the world.
As the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, investors realized arsenic could be used to make new manufactured products.
Arsenic was suddenly everywhere. It was a key requirement for wallpaper coloring, glass manufacture, lead shot, pharmaceutical processes, sheep dip. Arsenic was suddenly the wonder compound of the early 1800s.
Women even used it as makeup to whiten their faces. It found its way into almost every aspect of 19th century life. But those worst affected were the people who worked in the plants that produced it.
This is not a mechanised process. So it's all done by hand, with shovels and scraping of the crystallised arsenic off of the walls.
There were no organised safety measures or protective clothing for the workers. They individually covered their skin in clay and used wet rags to cover their faces. And as you can imagine, neither of these were effective.
Prolonged exposure to arsenic could have devastating consequences.
People start to get fatigue and become quite, you get stomach cramps and so on. And ultimately, in very extreme exposures, this can lead to body shock and death.
It was truly a deadly job.
Just 1 teaspoon of the arsenic they produced was a lethal dose for 6 people.
Before long, arsenic was killing more than just the workers who made it. During the First World War, chemical weapons containing arsenic made in England were used for the first time. Poison gas, including chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas, was a terrifying new weapon intended to break the stalemate on the Western Front. It was first deployed in 1915. Its effects on victims were dreadful, and not surprisingly, gas attacks struck fear into the hearts of soldiers of all armies. But they were dependent on the weather for success. Unfavorable winds could disperse the gas, making it less potent, or at worst blow it back towards those who had launched it. And it never produced the decisive breakthrough that it once promised. Back in England, it became clear that prolonged exposure to the chemical was causing serious health issues for people employed in pharmaceuticals and agriculture. Eventually, the dangers could no longer be ignored or denied.
Despite arsenic's use in a range of pharmaceutical and medical products, increased knowledge about its intense toxicity and its links to cancer soon spelled the end for the arsenic trade.
One of the sites in Cornwall did continue to produce arsenic until the outbreak of the Second World War.
Work continued until 1939. At that time, other materials had come along for use in insecticides and so forth, so arsenic was no longer needed in the huge quantities it was, particularly in the 19th century.
For decades after these sites closed, the valley's toxic past was all but forgotten. But in 1994, a ground survey revealed that the countryside still contained high levels of the poison, and the area had to be decontaminated before it could be opened to the public.
These days, the site is a nature reserve. Most visitors to the site are blithely unaware of the deadly past which lies just beneath their feet.
In the province of Muğla in Turkey is a ruined town with centuries of extraordinary history.
As you come inland from the coasts of Anatolia, through the pine forests, a vista suddenly opens. But as you approach closer, you realize there's something a little wrong with it.
This is a devastated village. It's clearly been abandoned for a long, long time.
It just keeps on going. It is absolutely huge.
Carved into the side of the valley are hundreds upon hundreds of deserted buildings.
You've got trees growing out of where there once was roofs. You've got just undergrowth everywhere. This place is clearly just a shadow of its former glory.
The level of destruction here is on such a scale that some major event has happened. This is not a one-off small occurrence.
Was it some kind of natural disaster? Was it war? People fled en masse, but why?
Spread far and wide across the hillside, the ruins here are testaments to a long and rich history.
This town goes back almost 1,000 years. It's clearly moderately prosperous.
This town was clearly important at some time. These aren't temporary shacks that are built.
It's very well located for local and even international trade. You feel here that this was a place that had strong, deep roots.
The inhabitants nurtured a close relationship with the farmers in the valley below. But there was a key difference between the two peoples.
The architecture reveals a lot about the people, but it's not only houses that are part of this village. There's one key building that still survives and gives the clue to who this community were.
This structure is amazing. This is a place for the Greek people who lived in that area hundreds years ago.
For centuries, this area had been part of the Ottoman Empire, a predominantly Turkish Muslim society, but one that embraced different nationalities and cultures, including those who lived here. These are the remains of the town of Kayakoy, the home of a Greek Christian community which has long since disappeared.
It was a Christian community, but on the other side, in the valley, the Turks were living over there. So they were neighbors, Muslim and Christian people. It was a multicultural community. They lived together, like in peace.
In many parts of the world, identity, ethnicity, and culture often form no part of daily life. Communities cohere and undertake the project of building their lives. But we also know that those very same factors can be the basis for some of the bloodiest conflicts in history.
For more than 500 years, the two communities lived and worked side by side, often coming together in the maze of streets.
There is the typical streets of Kayakoy. You can see around some buildings and some houses or shops around. You can imagine kids were playing together. The Muslim people and the Christian community, they were talking about business, trade, or any normal formal things.
Here you had these two communities working together and forming friendships.
This vibrant town had flourished for hundreds of years. But when the Ottoman Empire began to falter at the beginning of the 20th century, the first problems started to appear.
Life in the Kayakoy was about to change. The conditions, the politics, everything changed in that area for their lives too.
So what destructive force hit the town? And what happened to the people that once called it home? For answers, we need to look to the unsettled years following the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, beginning a heated battle between two opposing nationalist movements.
In Greece, you have a movement towards a greater Greece. From the Turkish side, they want to create a republic for all the Turkish ethnic people. These two powerful national forces collide.
As the conflict enveloped modern-day Turkey, many small, peaceful rural communities were drawn in.
Despite the centuries of harmony within these communities, the arrival of war meant that all the horrors of war came with it. Torture, atrocities, intense cruelty on both sides.
We know about the abuses that the Greeks carried out on the Turks. We're talking murders, we're talking destruction homes. Now we have reports about the Turks carrying out revenge attacks, burning Greek properties, killing Greeks.
By 1922, hundreds of thousands of Turks and Greeks had been killed. Both sides agreed upon a so-called compulsory exchange of populations, which meant that even communities that had remained on good terms were forced to leave.
So this is one of the examples of Greek houses in Kayakoy. This is actually their kitchen. When they learned they had to leave to Greece, they chatted with their neighbors, Turks, Muslims, and they told them just look after their homes because they expected to come back, but they never come back.
500,000 ethnic Turks who are living within Greek territory are simply deprived of their property. They are shipped out to Turkey. About 1.5 million ethnic Greeks who had lived, and in some cases in majority Greek villages, are expelled.
You've got this once beautiful town with these communities thriving side by side and a joyful town, and then it's abandoned. Its soul is ripped out of it.
In 1957, the abandoned remains suffered a final blow when an earthquake struck, tearing down fragile walls. But the true damage had already been done.
It's hard to overestimate the seriousness of the effect of these kinds of actions. Effacing the culture of a people, which is what this is doing, is seen as on a par with effacing actual people, because if you take away culture and history, you leave nothing. Ultimately, that's all communities have.
Now they're abandoned. But once, many were beacons of hope and progress. Each one is steeped in history. Some remind us of difficult times, but also of human imagination, enterprise, and spirit.